Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the JMO Podcast. I'm your host, Taylor Michaels, and our guest this week takes us to Newtown, North Dakota on Lake Sakakawea. Clayton Folden started his guide career on the Big Missouri River Reservoir in 1979. Needless to say, they've been through a lot together. Clayton's had a storied career in the fishing industry on Lake Sakakawea, being inducted into the North Dakota Fishing Hall of Fame. He's won so many of the most popular tournaments on that body of water, including the elusive North Dakota Governor's Cup Walleye Derby. You'll recognize Clayton at the Van Hook Bait Shop. He'll be first in line every single morning, wearing his classic fishing attire, his denim overalls. But don't let the look fool you. Clayton is a stick in the boat. He always has been. We're super lucky to have him on this week's show. So many great stories and so much to learn about Lake Sakakawea jig fishing from Clayton Folden on this week's JMO Podcast. Make sure to visit our Facebook and Instagram pages at Jason Mitchell Outdoors to recommend a guest or a topic for an upcoming episode of the JMO Podcast.
Hello.
Clayton Folden?
Yes.
This is Taylor Michaels from Jason Mitchell Outdoors.
How are we doing?
I'm doing good, man. How are you doing?
Doing fine.
Clayton, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. It's an honor to have you on the show. And to start it off, I might have to have you introduce yourself a little bit to the listeners and just talk a little bit about your fishing career over the years and how everything started out for you out there in North Dakota.
Well, I started fishing back on Lake Sakakawea back in late 60s. You know, I was born and raised on deep water. We started shore fishing there when we were kids, you know, and then as time went on, we'd get a boat or borrow a boat or whatever, and we'd, you know, just cruise the shorelines pulling spinners and stuff. And it worked good. Moved to Van Hook in the late 70s and started guiding about 79. And then I started really doing a lot of fishing. And at that time, 98% of the fishing was just jigs, or was just, bottom bouncers and spinners and Lindy rigs. And then as time went on, I started jigging. I met a guy from Des Moines, Iowa, a fellow by the name of Jesse Roush. And he wouldn't pull a spinner or Lindy rig. He just casted his jig. And man, he was out fishing all of us. He was down to 2-pound test line, 4-pound test line. And he lost a lot of big fish, but he caught a lot of big fish. And so I started jigging, and I learned a lot from him. And in the wintertime, old friend of mine, John Cozen, moved into the park, Van Hook, and I started going ice fishing with him. And he made all his own jigs, and he made bucktail jigs. And, you know, we had to save every white-tailed deer we got in the country, and he'd get the hair off it and make jigs, bucktail jigs. And he taught me a lot about fishing, especially ice fishing jigs. Then I put those techniques to work in the boat, and I very rarely go out fishing unless I have a jig in my hand at all times. You know, I use 2 rods. I put a dead line over the side with a Lindy rig or a spinner on, and then I'll cast that jig. And I don't vertical jig a lot. I like to cast up towards the shore and work them from shallow to deep. And depends on, you know, spring of the year, they're right up there 2-3 foot of water, and late fall they're up there 2-3 feet of water. And you get into August and early September, you know, you can cast up there, you'll get a few, but most of the time you got to work it back to the boat in that 30 foot, 25 foot, and that's when you catch them. But I don't vertical jig very much. A lot of guys do. I like to cast them, and I use 6-pound test line. I use that Trilene Sensation, the green solar, because I can see it. And a lot of times you're pitching a jig, it's windy, you get a bow in your line, but you can see that line jump. And when it jumps, something's hit it. You probably didn't feel it, but you see the line jump, and you better set the hook.
Yeah. I love what you said there. I mean, going back to your guide career in '79 started, you must have seen quite an evolution in some of these things. You're talking about making bucktail jigs. I mean, that was the real deal, man. That was real whitetail deer, whitetail bucktail hair on them jigs. Going back there and talking about, I'd like to have you talk a little bit about what jigging was like back then in comparison to now, with all the technology changes and the lake changes, the ecosystem changes as well, and just how things were done back then in comparison to now.
Well, back then, we fished a tail race a lot. And of course, there was an older feller down there. I can't remember his name, but he made bucktail jigs, and we used them in the tail race. But man, he'd make them up to ounce and a half, in that fast water, and that's what everybody used, with a sucker minnow on it or a great big minnow, and we caught a lot of fish on them ounce and a half jigs. Well, since that time, old John made jigs, but the biggest he made was 3/4 ounce. And we went from ounce and a half to 3/4. And now if we use a jig much over a 1/4 ounce, it's unheard of, But at that time, when we first started jigging, we probably had 10-pound test line on down the tail race down there because you lost so many jigs. But now we went from them ounce jigs all the way to eighth and a 16th, and I prefer probably a 1/4 is my all-around favorite jig right now. But it seems like you got to match the jig to the conditions, the depth and the wind and stuff like that. But on the average day, 3/16 or 1/4 ounces seems like it just depends on how active the fish are. If they like it falling a little faster, a 1/4 ounce work. If they don't want it that fast, if it drops a little slower, then they'll hit it. So you go to a smaller jig. But basically, jigging's been the same for the last 50 years, but we've downsized a lot. And instead of using minnows, crawlers or something like that, a lot of times we're using plastic bait, the Zoom or the Gulp or stuff like that.
What would you say is on Sakakawea specifically, in your experience over the years, where the jig really shines? You mentioned in the spring and in the fall when they go shallow. Let's talk fall here. What are some of the scenarios, and what do the spots look like on days when the jig really is kind of some of that been a primary method for you?
Well, late fall or early spring, they're both the same. Those fish are in the shallows, and early in the morning, man, you can cast up there and hit the bank and drag it back, and you'll catch one once in a while. They're in 2-3 feet of water. If it's kind of cloudy or just a little bit of chop or something, that seems to work the best. Although I've done great on days when it's absolutely been dead calm early in the morning, or used to be late in the evening, right when the sun started going down. Man, they'd move shallow then, and we'd catch them up there in 1 foot to 2 foot of water with 8th ounce, 16th ounce jigs. Seems like it's got to be a gravel bottom or a rocky bottom. The more rocks, the better. So you lose some jigs, but if you're using real light jigs, it makes a lot of difference. You can get that out, but most of the time, if they're really in there, you don't snag up much. They grab it before you get snagged.
And you talked about in the low light periods, like morning or evening, when they're really moving up shallow. What are you doing during the day? Maybe using other methods to find some of that productive water and that might be good for jigging in the evening. Talk a little bit about some of the day-to-day time spent in the boat, kind of method to your madness there.
Well, back when I and old John used to fish together, we were fishing upriver from Newtown, and man, we'd get out there probably noon, 1 o'clock, and we'd fish. We'd fish till the sun was actually starting to go down, and we might have 1 or 2 fish. But once that sun just started hitting the shoreline on the other side, going down, man, they just lit up, and I don't know why, but we'd catch a limit of fish in 20 minutes there, and then it was dark. It got dark real fast. But I don't know. We could catch fish out real deep. We'd get occasional walleye, but mostly sarders. But them walleyes just, for some reason, when they moved up in that shoreline right at sundown, they just went wild. And I don't know. And I've done it north of the bridge at Newtown, south of the bridge. I've done it at Van Hook, deep water. Something triggers them. And I don't know if the bait fish just move up shallow. It's got to be, as far as I can tell. But right before sundown, late in the fall, that's my favorite time to fish.
Yeah.
Right before ice out or up.
Yeah. Do you, would you say that, by and large, by the numbers over the years, in the fall, are you finding your best spots on big, like main lake structure, or are you trying to find?
Well, I just look for the rocky points, rocky gravelly points. That's where you're going to find the walleyes late in the fall. Right off the main river channel is the best. Like a Deepwater or the Beacon, or you get up north of Newtown, you got White Earth Bay, the points there, and Beaver Bay and Tobacco Gardens, all of them rocky points and little bays. All the way, you just keep going until you find a spot where you got them. And you keep trying them points. I don't go inside the bays very often. You don't need to. Because they'll be right on them points and them gravel bars or on them rocky points. Now, sometimes in the spring of the year, you go in the back of the bay a little bit. You go around inside and you'll catch them, but not as much in the fall. Seems to me just right on the points.
Here we are now. We're getting into fall. What is it that just makes you look forward to it so much?
Well, the fish are normally a lot bigger. You cast that real light jig up there, and all you feel is a tick. You don't rarely have that tackle busting strike or whatever. You just got a little tick, and when you can feel that little tick, you just rear back and set the hook, and that's what I like. And you don't know whether it's going to be a big one or a little one, because that tick is so fine. But most of the time, when you feel that little tick, it's a good fish. The smaller fish kind of just grab it and hold on. That little tick, they got it. And a lot of guys feel that little tick, and then they'll hold their rod and think they're going to hit it again. Well, most of the time, if you don't set that hook when you feel that tick, you're not going to get that fish, or you see that line jump. But that's what I like. And you never know. You can cast 1,000 times. It's kind of like musky fishing. And then all of a sudden, you might get 4 or 5 in a row.
Yeah.
But that's what I like.
Is it purely a big fish time of year, or do you think that the numbers game goes up too a little bit in the fall? I mean, everything's kind of putting the feed bag on, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, you'll catch some smaller fish too, but generally overall, you're going to catch your bigger fish late in the fall or real early in the spring, right? The last few springs have been just super for big fish. I bet you we released 25 big walleyes last spring right off the boat ramp in Van Hook on the low water boat ramp. The ice was only out about 300 yards, and we took the boat out and fished right along the kind of the shoreline and the low water boat ramp. And man, they put on big plastic, and just about every cast we'd get a big fish. I'm talking 23 to 28, 29-inch fish. And, that went on for about 2 weeks. And, of course, then they started to spawn. But late fall, once, like last year on December 7th, Pearl Harbor Day, that was the last day we could be in the boat because, it froze up when we were sitting out there. We had to break ice coming in. It was dead calm. But, man, we had some monster walleyes, and we didn't get a lot of fish that day. We couldn't really get to all the spots we wanted because the ice was shifting in there. But I like to fish right up to ice up. And they'll bite right up to the last day you can get that boat in.
Man, oh man, I tell you what, Clayton, I just love hearing those stories. It's kind of inspiring, and the the pressure goes down a little bit too, right? Everybody the kids go back to school, and a lot of people like to get out hunting a little bit more, and they kind of put their boat away, and it's kind of a nice time of year to be out there when there's a few less boats, isn't it?
Well, there's not many boats out there that time of year. I think there was 3 though last year out there on December 7th, 3 or 4 on Independence Point, but we all had to kind of move around because the ice was cutting us off from one point to another. But we caught some dandy fish there, and yeah, there's not a lot of people out there. A lot of them fish up until about deer season, and then they're pretty much done. They're putting their boats away, but we never put our boat away because we fish all winter in the tail race. So.
Oh man, yeah. The JMO podcast is sponsored by Long Haul Trucking. Long Haul's always looking for more skilled professional CDL drivers to join their team. They're a people-first company, and it shows. Their employee-owned, asset-based fleet of over 350 Conestogas is among industry leaders in pay and benefits geared towards long-term success and growth for company drivers and owner-operators. If you're a professional driver or a company that wants to ship product with the best in the business, get a hold of Long Haul at 1-800-255-5153 or find them online at longhaultrucking.com. Long Haul, running on the power of promises kept. Yeah, Clayton, I love it, man. Can you think of any more stories? One thing I had written down, and it's a big topic. Lake Sakakawea is real trendy right now in the industry, and there's big tournaments coming there to find these big fish. It's just a real productive fishery right now. Do you have any memories? I'm sure you have many examples of the ups and downs of the fishery and the fall fishing. And where does these last couple of years and hopefully what this year is going to be stack up to the history of the fall fishing seasons of years past for you?
Well, the fall fishing is, for as many years as I can remember, has been really good. The summer fishing, since the time in the early 90s there when we had the real low water, we went through some tough summers. We caught fish, but it seemed like in the fall of the year we'd still get our fish. But these last 2 summers right now, we've seen more people than we've ever had on this lake. A lot of out of state, of course. This year with the COVID, they couldn't go to Canada, so a lot of them took their vacations and come to Sakakawea, and we've seen a lot of out of state boats from Iowa, Minnesota, Nebraska, Kansas, Wyoming, Montana, a lot of people. And the majority of those guys caught fish, but small fish, a lot of 12, 13-inch fish. I don't know, for some reason, the 20-inch fish, I don't know, we're not seeing many of them. I don't know if it's just because there's so many little fish that they're more active and they're taking the bait before the 20 and 25 inches get there. I don't know. But it seems like the last couple of years, all the tournaments, every tournament on the lake, if you don't have 25 or 30 pounds each day in a tournament, you're not even going to be in the top 5 or top 10. Every tournament, them guys, people, the younger guys with the electronics and the big boats and the big motors now, and most of these tournaments they're open boundaries. So they're traveling 25 to 50, 60 miles, and they're good fishermen. They know how to run their electronics. They know how to run their boats. The majority of the big fish, the big bags that are coming in, they're not on crankbaits, and you'll get a few on crankbaits, but they're using big bait, big chubs or whatever. It's gotten to the point now where if you're going to win a tournament, you're going to be using chubs. You might jig them or Lindy rig them, but a lot of them are start slip bobbering, pulling in on a point and just putting out their 4 lines and slip bobbering. Tactics have changed, and the average fisherman that's been fishing out here for 25 years hasn't really adapted to that protocol yet. And there's not a lot of places where you can get that kind of bait. You pretty near got to trap it yourself because there's no bait shop selling it. But
yeah. I was talking to a guy not long ago that was talking about how most fishermen would probably rather give up their deer hunting spot or even their best walleye spot, but they'll never give up their creek chub spot.
No, they're pretty well guarded secrets, and there's only so many places in the state where you can get them, and they only run so many creeks, and I don't know why, but we've got several creeks coming into the lake here. Hell, there's only one of them I know of that you can get some, and they're pretty well guarded, so you can get a few, but they're tough to come by.
And what do you, what is your perspective, on that? It's, for a guy like you that has made a living fishing out there on Sakakawea and different areas on Sakakawea, that's a diverse fishery, and it offers a lot to any one guy that wants to learn different nuances. But sometimes when you have those big tournaments, or you get a lot of good fishermen coming from other places in the country that come, that's a good time to learn too, isn't it?
Oh yeah, yeah. These guys. Well, a lot of them are pros. That's a lot of them. That's all they do, like fish in those tournaments. And those guys travel all over the United States and learn different tactics here and there. And one thing about fishing, I've noticed it since I was a kid. When we first started out, it was a minnow round and a sucker minnow on a throw it out there, and you'd catch walleyes. Or if you was pulling, crankbaits at that time, was lazy ikes and Brooks reefers and stuff like that. Well, that went on good for 3-4 years, and then pretty soon nothing on that. You went to hellbenders and Hottentot, changed tactics again, and then all that went to heck. And then later on, then the shad raps come in, and then they were worked. I mean, people killed them on shad raps, and then after that, oh man, they come out with them big, deep bombers and diving baits and stuff like that. And, you never hear anybody pulling a lazy ike or a Brooks reefer anymore, or even a shad rap. Now it's flicker minnows or bombers. Or bombers been holding their own for several years, but it seems like you got to change. You got to change. I don't know if the fish get used to something and just say, hell with it, I ain't gonna bite that anymore, or what, but it seems like you've got to change all the time. You got to keep up with something, reading or trying new stuff. The only thing that hasn't changed in all my years is the jig.
Yeah.
Sometimes in summertime the jig does not work worth a dang, but spring or fall it's going to work. But it'll work in summertime too. But when them fish get more active, usually they like it a little faster and stuff. So a spinner or a crankbait does work better. You'll catch more. You'll still catch some fish on a jig, but not as fast as you do on the other stuff. Well, I used to fish with Dick Sternberg. He was an outdoor writer, and he also worked for DNR in Minnesota. And he came out here and fished, and he brought the Grizz with him, like Grzinski. I can't remember his first name, but they call him the Grizz. And the Grizz always made his own jigs, and he didn't use a hair jig. He used chicken feathers on his. But man, oh man, he could catch big walleyes. He'd give you one jig is all he'd give you, and if you lost it, you didn't get another one. He was tighter than heck with that jig. But man, oh man, did that jig work. And, you popped it so hard. It was about a 1/4 ounce jig, and you throw it up shallow. And actually, he had tendonitis or tennis elbow, so he couldn't hardly work that jig. But I and Dick Sternberg could. We figured out how to do it. And man, God, that jig worked. But I got one jig from him. I kept it a long time, but I lost it.
Nice. I tell you what, Clayton, you've been quite a maestro on Lake Sakakawea, from one end to the other for a lot of years, and you fished some tournaments with some pretty tough fields, and you finished pretty well. Do you have any memories of a real good tournament finish over the years while you were jigging?
Gosh, I think I jigged in every tournament I ever fished. Won the Governor's Cup. We had a double, and we needed one fish, and I got a fish on, and we just dipped it in, and I looked over, and the other pole was bent over, and Shorty grabbed that one, we reeled it in. Both fish were about the same size, and I told him, I said, let's just unhook the one I got in the boat and let the other one go, and we'll just take it from here, see what happens. But I caught that particular fish on a little pink and white jig. That's all we were using. Is this in fact, there's a homemade jig. A friend of ours made them. He gave me a handful of them to take down to take down to the Governor's Cup, and that's what we won that tournament. That's a big tournament.
Oh man,
Governor's Cup,
big time.
We won it, but it was on jigs that first year that we won it, and the second year we got second. But that year we were using bombers going through the weeds, just jerking the heck out of them. You'd get weeded up and you'd jerk it real hard, and the weeds would come off, and then all of a sudden, bang, you'd get a nice walleye. But yeah, jigs will always work.
And what were some of the weights back then when you won that Governor's Cup on them jig in there that first time? What were some of the weights back then?
I think when we won it, it was like 36, 37 pounds.
And that's a 2-day weight, 10 fish?
That's 2-day weight, yeah. Nice. Weights have gone up. There was times down there it didn't take any weight hardly to win a tournament. But now the weights are way up there. I think the average weight in the Governor's Cup was around between 30 and 40 pounds for most of the years,
And do you think that... do you think that the fishing and the technology has gotten better to find and nail down some of those bigger fish? Or do you think that the fishery itself is just going through changes and we're on an upswing? Or I suppose the answer is somewhere in the middle, right? It's a little bit of both?
Well, it's a little bit of both, but it all depends on the bait fish out there. They got to have the smelt. They got to have something to eat. And if they don't have something to eat, they get pretty skinny in a hurry, and they travel. They do adapt. When we did lose all our smelt that time, we thought, man, we're going to lose our fishery and everything. But those fish adapt too. It's a lot easier to go through a whole ball of smelt and get some fish than chasing one paddlefish around or chasing a little perch around. But that's what we were finding when we were catching those fish quite a few years ago and the smelt disappeared. A lot of times them walleyes would have paddlefish sticking out of their mouth, just a tail. Or they'd have a white bass or a perch. They'll adapt. They're not going to starve to death. They'll eat something else. When they got the smelt, it's kind of easy pickings, and they're so rich, and the fish gain weight on them. It's funny. You can catch fish all summer long out in Van Hook or in the river. You clean them, you don't see nothing in their stomach. I mean, not a thing. But you come early spring or you go late fall, man, your live well is plumb full of smelt that they puked up. But in the summertime, I don't know I think they're eating bugs and little minnows and stuff like that have just hatched. They'll eat the big chubs and stuff, but you never see nothing in their stomach in the summertime. Yeah. And I've noticed that for 40 years.
Yeah. And so how does that, how much thought do you put into your bait selection in terms of that? Like when you're seeing stuff in their stomach or you're not seeing stuff in their stomach, what colors work out there and what colors have you seen just not work at all? What is kind of the general rule of thumb when it comes to selecting your baits and your color schemes and that sort of thing out there?
Well, I use a bare lead jig. I haven't put a painted jig on and unless I just grab one out of the box. I haven't used a painted jig this year. I probably haven't used one for a couple of years, unless somebody throws me one or something. But just a bare lead edge jig with a little minnow on it, or a piece of crawler or elite. In the summertime, just a little chunk of crawler on a jig will outfish anything. Later on in the year, or early in the spring, just a minnow or a chub on there. But, you start using them chubs, then you got to go to, a little bigger jig or, a bigger hook size because they're pretty good size. But I normally use just a little minnow and a bare lead head jig all fall. I just took my boat, cleaned the boat and took my jigging poles out. All 3 jigging poles they're 3 different size jigs, but there's not a bit of paint on any of them. And my son-in-law, he's a tremendous jig fisherman. He don't have a painted jig in his boat either, but we'll use different plastics, different colored plastics, gray, blue, or white. That will do. But as far as the painted jig, I don't need one. I feel comfortable just with a barrel head jig.
Right on, man. Is there anything else that pops into your head about Lake Sakakawea jig fishing that over the years that people might want to hear, that you might want to say?
Well, be persistent and keep working the jig. Cast it up shallow and work it back to the boat. And you do that, and once you can tell the difference between the bottom and a bite, you got her made. Just when you feel that little tick, you always got to throw that jig up there and let the line out until it hits bottom, and then just lift her up and drop her down. You feel that hit bottom, and reel up your slack, and just do that. Keep up and down until you get it back to the boat. And a lot of times they'll hit it when you're on that last bounce right below the boat too. But normally when I get it back to the boat, I just reel her up and throw her back up there and let her hit bottom and work her right back. And that's the trick to jig fishing. Just once you learn the difference between the bottom and the bite and where your jig is at all times, you got her made.
I love it, Clayton. Do you put out any fishing reports or anything anywhere that we could promote right now? Or
I'm pretty much retired. I just go fishing.
I'll let you back at it. Good luck fishing this fall, and thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
All right. Take care. Tell Jason hi.
Will do for sure, Clayton. We'll see ya.
Okay. Bye.
And thank you all for following along on another episode of the podcast. If you're following on YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, or Apple Podcasts, make sure to like, subscribe, share with your fishing friends, and head over to our social medias on Facebook and Instagram at Jason Mitchell Outdoors, where you can recommend a guest or a topic for an upcoming show.